We've got the recording on my slides.
Can see.
And you'll see, for some reason, I can't see it on the Teams. Okay. Everything good, Debs? You can see the
Yes,
slide.
I can see it.
Okay.
The designing
Right.
semantic layer.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining. All right, so just one thing that I wanted to share with you. I'm going to try to make this very practical, and I've done a lot of this work that I'm talking about. I've done it in Power BI, just to show you, to give you an example. And the reason I did that was last week we spoke about the semantic model and the knowledge management, and then going into the context mesh in terms of improving our understanding of what's actually going on. So it's actually quite an interesting engagement. So sorry that it's Power BI. I mean, it's just I'm just trying to show you an example in that scenario. All right. So what we're trying to do here is focus on the first step that we're trying to do is making sure that our data models, being the tabular model or the Power BI model, is ready for AI. And I don't know how many of you have done that. It would be nice to see how many of you have actually gone through this process of, in Power BI, you do a prep data for AI. Any hands up in terms of those that have done it? Okay, not many. All right, so maybe it's just a Power BI thing. All right, now what I have done is I have prepared a workbook that you may find very helpful, and you can certainly I'll provide a copy of this. And there's a whole lot of tabs that we build to be able to show people and to get my data right. So the first thing that I'm doing is this tab over here tells the AI system what schema information to use and what schema information not to use. So I don't want them, for example, showing PII data. I don't want them showing terms and conditions that may be sensitive data. And then it's things like synonyms. So for the different columns, for example, the policy ID, I'm saying this is a policy number. And the reason for that is when I go into Power BI and I go into the Copilot and I ask for some information, ask for some feedback, just show the top 10 policy numbers. I want to make sure that this Copilot actually gets the data back and can make some sense out of that. Yeah, and if I just use policy ID, well then there's going to be some problems with that. Okay, so I'll come back to this and I'll show you what. So these are the synonyms. Then there's a set of AI instructions. So what I'm desperately trying to do is make sure that I'm guiding AI. I'm actually providing it with prompts. I'm providing it with understanding that it can go. So what is claims versus premiums? What's the date logic? What's the effective date that should be used on policy? What are the status fields, the free text, things like that. And then I've got instructions that are table specific. And then this one I really like, and I don't know how many of you have done the Steve Hoberman course, but one of the things that I like to do as part of my dimensional model business requirements is I like to define the questions. Okay, so what questions do we need to ask? So show me the policy count by policy status, policy inceptions, policy by jurisdiction, claims by policy. So remember, if you remember this, when we do a set of questions for a dimensional model, it tends to be the measure by dimension, by, and we build these set of questions that we'd like to do. And I found this very fascinating because it's probably something that we don't do. We sometimes jump into the building of our dimensional model, and we don't define the questions that the model should be able to answer. And then, of course, the nice thing about defining these questions is that you can then build your data quality dashboard on these are the questions that need to be answered. So I need to make sure that the quality is appropriate at that level. So I get my critical data elements that come out of it. Okay. All right. So there's the top 10 policy numbers. Okay. P1281, whatever it is. That's quite nice. And then really the nice thing that you can do is you can actually ask Copilot, well, how did you get there? How did you get that answer? What calculations did you do? Okay. And for any of those that are interested, there's a set of YouTubes where you can connect Claude to your Power BI model, and you can actually ask it questions, and you can ask it to build report pages, and I'm going to give you some examples of that. So now we've got the local Claude talking to the MCP BI server talking to your BI models. Okay. All right, so back to this, we want to get our models, we want to get our Power BI model ready for AI, whichever LLM is going to query it. And then what I'd like to show you, and I hope I'm going to be able to get to that, is this will answer pretty much the what. I can ask questions about what has happened. That's typically BI. Again, now what I can't ask is why did it happen? Why was that? Why did I approve that? And things like that. And I'd like to show you what I've done to be able to get this work. Okay. And then, okay, so maybe just to pause there, does everyone understand what I'm trying to do? If you remember from last week, I differentiated between the semantic model, the ontology that tells me what, it does not tell me why. It doesn't give me the answers as to why. And knowledge management, a constant collection of knowledge management is going to give us the why. But now I need to join these two and make them accessible in Power BI. Let me ask Paul. Paul, Paul Bolton, am I making sense? Oh.
I'm following. I'm trying to follow.
Okay, all right. Let me ask Mark. Mark Nolte, does that make sense to you in terms of what I'm trying to achieve?
Yeah, I'm with you so far.
Okay, great. So we're desperately trying to make sure that whatever we develop in Tabular, Power BI, whatever we do, we want to make sure that those reports, the work that we've done there is accessible to the LLM, and it doesn't have to go directly issuing SQL comments to the raw database and then get some interesting answers and challenges like that. So what we're desperately trying to do is create that semantic model and then allow the AI agent to go through the semantic model, not to try to get and play around in these different types of areas. Now, of course, there's some vendors that have already done that. dbt is one of them. They build an enterprise semantic layer, and this one is semantic by report. So if I can say on the report that this question has been verified, this visualization has been, it can answer these questions. So that is a governance thing where I verify the answers. That's what I'm picking up over here. Okay, so now just to show you that in Power BI, I would go into a visual and I'd say to the visual, set up a verified answer. So what answers and what they will do is to say, Copilot will actually suggest this. How does premium compare to payout over time? I can say, okay, please add that one. Which dates have higher premiums? Which dates is payout higher than the premium? Okay. And then I can apply that. And then if that question is asked within the Power BI model, it will show this visualization. Okay, so I've got verified answers that I'm looking at. Okay. Right, so basically the way we go through this is the first step, we have to simplify our data schemas. Okay, and we have to improve the naming conventions. We have to improve the joins. If we've got snowflakes all over the place, it's going to battle. And then the next step is to bring out the synonyms to prevent hallucinations. And then we bind the visuals as verified answers. We bind the visual to questions as verified answers. And then we can connect. We can connect Claude, or we can connect ChatGPT or Copilot Chat in Visual Studio. We can connect it directly to the Power BI model. Okay. So the first thing I do is I build this semantic model, and I've got two fact tables. I've got claims and premiums, and these are the dimensions that I'm working on. And of course, I'm trying to take care of the different natural language. There was a question coming out there. The verified answers sound a kind of key business questions. That's exactly, Dan, that's exactly what it is. And this is the sort of stuff that we should have done as the business requirements. I tried to make that point a little bit earlier on to say, when I teach data modeling, one of the things that I do is when we solicit business requirements, of course, this is not exactly the same for ERD, but for dimensional models, it's those key business questions. So Dan, you spot on. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. Now, if we had that before, this would be very nice. You know, when we go to these are my questions that I'm working on. I wouldn't need to make them up when I'm trying to create a semantic model out of this thing. They should be there as part of the solution. Okay, so here's something like 28 questions that I'm happy to answer. Policy inceptions, what's the trigger phrase? These are the questions, and the claims trend, and just different areas like that. Okay, in the enterprise setting, the semantic would ideally be embedded in the metadata repository. Yes, Ronald. So what you will find is when I set this up in Microsoft, I actually have a metadata repository, a semantic model, and all of this information gets stored into the enterprise layer. So that does it, and certainly DBT does that as well. Okay, next. Now, of course, there's lots of debate as to how hard that is to build an enterprise model, an enterprise semantic model, but people like to almost operate at a domain semantic model and then bring the enterprise one after that. Ronald, I hope that answers your questions. Okay, so one of the important things is getting rid of all of these technical keys, everything that joins to the fact table, the adjuster, the claim adjuster, the claim status, get rid of that thing. And the policy ID and all of those different things we need to get rid of. Okay, second step is creating these trigger phrases to verified answers. So basically saying, here's a visual, I validated it, I've done quality checks on it, and it can answer these questions. So whenever these questions are asked by Copilot, then it should provide those answers. Okay. And then the last one is to allow, and I'm actually going to show you this, is that I can actually get Copilot to generate, using those questions, I can get it to generate these report pages. It actually goes and builds the report pages for me. Okay, so you don't have to work through that and create each one, and it's nice and consistent. So John, the question is, can the idea of a semantic layer be extended to the left so that meaning is always available to enterprise users? Granular as right. So that's certainly what one would do is to take those domain semantic models and then yeah, as Shane said, that would go up or left to the enterprise model. John, is that what you mean by left? Is getting to a more enterprise context? Okay. All right. So here's the demo that I wanted to show you, and just to be able to show you how I can deal with it. So I have shown you a couple of those questions in terms of. So let me just go back and demonstrate that with. So I can say, for example, how many active policies do we have? And of course, what I can do is I can validate that it's getting it from my verified answers. So whilst the thing's running, you can actually go and look at, here you've got download of the diagnostics that come out in a JSON file. And there you can see I've got the answers that I want to go. And I can add it to the page, and I can actually ask, well, how did Copilot get this? And it's got those areas over there. Okay, so I can go into the full screen, and I can then add this thing to a page if I wanted to. So I could say add this to a page, and now it builds a visual for me. So that's quite nice. Now the other thing that's really interesting is, let's say, for example, I created a executive dashboard. I'm just going to show you this. So there is preparation that I've done pre-prep. So I want to be able to build an executive overview dashboard, and then I want to have these two visuals, and those are the answers that I wanted to do, and it's going to be a line chart. These are the fields that I wanted to use. This is the primary measure. These are some of the slices. So sorry for that. That's a difficult color to read. So if I go and those are all the slices that I want you to be able to provide. All right. So just to show you here, what I have done is I've created a prompt. Okay. So there's the prompt that I've got sitting over here. Please create a prompt, and then I've just copied those questions and those visuals from the Excel into Notepad, just to make sure that it doesn't try to paste an image. And then I can go into Copilot, and I just say, well, please create a report page called Executive Overview to show claims and premiums that answer the following questions. And those were the questions for the executive overview. And there it goes. And it creates my executive overview. This is a rolling 12 months. And this is the loss ratio within that. And then it tells me what it did. So it actually can show me we decided to create those different ratios. Again. So the nice thing that we can start seeing is, oh shucks, it looks like we've got some challenges with our quality here. We've had some really big spikes in these different areas. There's a massive spike over there, and then we came down in these different areas. But that's pretty impressive. I don't know about you guys, but I was pretty blown away by the fact that I can use those questions and then build a dashboard or build a report page from that information. And from there, you can go in and say, well, set this up as a verified answer. Okay, so I can go in here, I can say to Copilot, how has the loss ratio changed over time? And I can add this info, what was at the start. I can apply that to that information with it. Okay. All right, then close that. And so we can see I can take any of those Excel spreadsheets, and I can just take all the visualizations that I can put in here, and Copilot will actually create the visualizations for me. So what is this showing us? Is it's basically showing us that now if we get the right data model, okay, and the data model has been set up correctly. And you can, what you can do is you can see I've spent lots of time just being able to make sure this data model is right, linking the right date, even if it's not an active relationship in my DAX. I'll say use this relationship, and I can then generate all this information. And you can see here in Power BI, it calls a semantic model. These are the collection groups. These are the different measures that I've got. And of course, all of these measures have descriptions. Tables have descriptions. Attributes have descriptions. So I'm wanting to give as much information with the synonyms that are there that when the person uses it, they can build their own stuff. Okay, so that's where we're going on that situation. And then, of course, one of the things that I have done is I've gone in here and I've set up, so there's my simplified schema. Basically said, don't show the policy ID that those links in the policy. Don't show that because it's got some PII. In the fact, don't show these records. Now, that's not the same as going into your model and hiding that field. Okay, you can actually set it up from here. Similarly, the fact premium, and if you want to take certain things out, you can take them out as well. And then I go to the verified answers. So these are all of the answers that I've attached to my visuals. And then here is my instructions, those AI instructions that you saw in Excel. Then you can go up to 10,000. You can do measure prioritization, date logic, use the following terms, how do you handle ambiguity, table selection guidance, visual types, recommended visual types. You can either say to them, don't use pie charts, and then quality. Okay, don't average that, don't expose this, and different elements like that. Okay, are there any questions? Kim, I see you tried to do it earlier this week, couldn't create a dashboard. When you say you couldn't create a dashboard, did you get an answer back? Did Copilot tell you why? Because I have had in situations it says, please create this, but it can't find the field name or it can't find the risk profile.
Yeah, you have to be very specific in your field names and your data sets. And then also there was limitations to the type of measures that I wanted. So it just got, it just built very standard totals and very standard graphs for me. But look at it, so still fantastic.
Yeah, now what I wanted to show you here is that one of the key things that you do when you go to a semantic model, and that's the advice, is that you actually ensure that that you won't go and do a sum at a table level. Okay, so you can't go and drag a field like this on like over here, and you sum the loss or you sum the payout amount. What you do is you create those measures, and the measures are quite complicated. Average deductible, loss ratio. So the measures are that's sort of where your DAX is coming in. Year on year, all your time calculations, the denied rate, and it can add all of that for you.
Yeah. So sorry, just a quick question. So do you still need to then create your measures?
Yes.
Okay.
So Kim, one of the things that they recommend is that that you have a measure for everything that you want to go to be aggregated, or average or sum or whatever it is. You specifically define a measure.
Okay.
You don't allow it to just grab a integer or a decimal field from one of your tables and sum it, because you can get into certain challenges with that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So that's what it's done, and it's created these different things, created the different policies, and then the next thing that I wanted to show you was what I did is I said, give me an executive summary on this report. And there's the report executive summary. And then what I did was I actually went into, I hope I can find it again. I went into my NotebookLM and I pasted that into NotebookLM. Okay. So I pasted that summary that I got, and then I say, build me an infographic. out of that, sorry, just taking a bit of time. And then I asked it to build an infographic. And if I go to, let's go back there. So there's my infographic that I created. These are the, so there's the portfolio and claims that I've created. So there is the snapshot that there you can see I've actually dumped that in. And this is the infographic that I created. Okay, so again, if you're wanting to generate a summary for your executives or you want to tell a story, well, there you go. And that's exactly what I did. I asked Copilot to tell me this, give me a summary of this report. I use this feature over here in Copilot, where I can say, yeah, these are the different skills that it has.
Oh.
Create new skills.
It wasn't, but I did.
Sorry, Dan.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Sorry, I meant to mute myself. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. All right. So on this one, I can then say, ask a question about the data, or create new report pages, or ask questions about the data. And I can say, please provide summary all information on this report. Okay, it goes away. And then I can take that and I can put it into the fancy NotebookLM and I can get my answers coming out of there. So that I thought was an amazing technique. And of course, what you can do is if you take that Power BI into the cloud, you can then into powerbi.com, you can then export it as a PDF and take it into the notebook. And I've done that as well. And I can now get a PowerPoint presentation or a really nice presentation of this, and I can download that information. I can build flashcards. This was quite nice. I actually had a flashcard to do a data literacy survey. So asking people, what are the two different types in the policy count? And I can flip that over. Accident, theft, storm, flood, these are the different types. And what AI trigger phrase, showing new policies over time. So you can actually build a data literacy course, okay, with NotebookLM. Now that you've got all of this information, and you can see I've downloaded this report into this. This is the report that I downloaded from powerbi.com. Okay, there's my summary. So this is quite interesting. Financial performance, total premiums, total payouts, policy count stands at 269, and steady month-on-month growth. Loss ratio experienced sharp fluctuations. Now this is quite cool because now I can say, well, where did that fluctuation come? And here you can see an example of where I've filtered it to actually see that sharp fluctuation. That gives me my potential outlines. Risk profiles, and it can give you the information that you're looking for. Okay, so there's the dashboard of that I had. Then I also asked that I brought some of this information into the Power BI report, and I asked it to build the data model for me. Okay, so it's talking about the fact claim and the premiums, the policies. These are the active policies, number of contracts, individual versus organization, and then the claim spike. Early in 2026, that's when I had a claim spike in the date dimensions. So I can start chasing after anomalies, like show me the loss ratio so I can see which period is the highest and where did I get my highest ratio. Of course, I get some errors every now and again, and when I get the error, I say, oh shucks, I haven't got a synonym, or I haven't got the appropriate semantic information over there. Okay, so there's an example of where I picked up the quality area in this data. Okay. Any questions on the semantic model? Mark,
Alex?
is it? Yes,
Yeah.
Paul.
Just maybe a comment on that last slide with the exposing the DQ is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a case of remember what we did is in a lot of our data quality assessments,
Yeah.
one of the things we did was we tried to look at the graph and see where those changes are, so that we could then go and drill into that and ask more detailed questions in that scenario. So, of course, with this executive overview, you're going to be very worried about this information over here.
Yeah.
Of course,
So
the loss ratio on a 12-month rolling means the year before it didn't have any data, so it was really increased at that level. But here's another one in terms of what happened here on
Yes.
the 7th, the 1st of the 7th, 2023. Mark, any questions from you?
I not to be critical, but it seems like it's a significant amount of work to set this up to avoid the LLM being confused.
Yes.
That can, I'd like to see some automate. I mean, I'd like to use my LLM to say disregard these irrelevant
Yes.
measures.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe that'll be next week's demo.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm stealing your thunder.
What I can, and that's, remember when I mentioned that YouTube, trying to YouTube, and this was on AI Power BI report. Okay, so this is now,
okay.
and I'll do some of this next week as well, and where he actually makes use of Claude, and he talks to the Power BI report, and he can say, do this and do that and hide this and do that, so you can drive anything from Claude.
That's the feeling I got from a coworker here who's deeper. I'm just not deep enough with Power BI, so
so certainly. So now that Power BI has got a MCP server, okay, any of your LLMs can talk to the MCP server. Does that make sense? That MCP is that
he's the guy. He's the man in the middle. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So connect Claude AI to there, and you can also put it in Visual Studio Code. Nice thing about Visual Studio Code in the Copilot chatbot is you can choose any model. You can choose Claude. You can choose ChatGPT, and any of them will work, and they really just pass it straight on to the MCP server. Okay.
Right. Good. I'll be here next week.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and of course, and I think I think there was a really nice article, Mark. I tried to talk about a little bit last week. Is we haven't been very successful in creating an enterprise semantic layer. Okay, there's been lots of failures. It's too hard. Lots of people think that they can do it. They can use AI to build that. I think it helps as you work together with AI, but I think you need a lot of guidance, and you need to guide it tremendously to get it to do what you need it to do. Okay. So lots of debates, and I think the one lady said almost a semantic model, semantic layer is a bit of a failure in terms of generating revenue for big companies, because it doesn't demonstrate value immediately. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, this is part of the drum that John is banging on, right? John O'Gorman, right? Do the definition work up front,
100%.
and the semantic model comes out the end correct.
Right.
So yeah.
And I really like that. I'm wanting to show you what I was doing is building in my semantic model. I'm just trying to get something here where I showed building all of those definitions, and from the definitions I could create my data model, and there's a whole lot of stuff I could do from the semantic model. Okay, because the semantic model tends to be in things like subject, predicate, object. This relates to this in some fashion, and already you've got to steer on what your data model should look like, and you're getting it right at that level. Yeah, so
Right.
So lots of benefits out of getting that online. Just trying to jump. Yeah, I can't find it now. Okay. All right, so that's what we're trying to do. So now we've got the semantic model right, and this is where we are trying to get to this situation, right, where any AI can query the semantic model and can ask all sorts of questions. What's the claim triage? It will come through here, and then it will go to the trustworthy semantic layer to actually get all the information. And what we are trying to do is navigate to the why. Okay. So this is what this is all about. So as I said, the semantic model gives us the what should be done, and we need to be able to answer the why. Okay, why did this happen? Why was my claim denied? And this is the hard part, because your data is only going to give you some information or the facts about the transaction. This person had this claim and they were denied. And the big question is, well, why were you denied? Especially 3-4 years back, why are you denied? And do we have any support? Do we have any information to support the why it was denied? And this is what I've now, in terms of, there's something called context mesh, and it creates what's called a context graph. And I think I remember seeing a lot of what John did on his Q16, where he would, whatever person, where there was a doctor's note or episode of care, and information was attached to that area on the graph, and when they needed it, they could go back to that information. Now, in building this context bundle and in looking at knowledge management, one of the things that people feel are the most important elements to have is, who are the actors? Who was involved in making the decision? So the claims operator, quality officer, what evidence was provided? Okay, what were the assumptions that were made? What were the signals that we got to make that decision? What policies guided the decision, and did we have any precedents? Okay, so this is really interesting now, because what we need to be able to do is, when we have a chatbot that makes a decision and there's some form of escalation, what we need to be able to do is to explain why, and to explain why you need to be able to present this context. Okay, and you can present that context and then store it associated with the data, and then you can go, and when the person asks why, you can go and give that information. Yes, William. Sorry, William. I can't hear you, William. Okay. Okay. So this is what I'm doing here is, I've created a context graph. Can you see? This is the context graph. A visualization. It's called a force-directed graph. And if I take that off, these are all of the relationships between the different nodes in the graph database. And now, if I look at a specific claim, I can say, all right, there's what we call a Y narrative. So this is the bundle that we have. This is the policy that was involved. These were the signals. This was the rationale. The rationale is balance speed with safety. And now what I can do is, when I do the drill through in Power BI, I can go to my Y dashboard, and there I get all of the information that was used to make this decision. And can you see here, I've also now started, I can now define the metrics around the why, the quality of the why, the trust in that decision, and then the components that we use to make that decision. We've even got a breadcrumb to say that this claim is based on that policy, and it was done by that adjuster. And here is all my why lists. What policy guided me? What was the assumptions? What signals did I work on? What are the precedents? And then what's the rationale between doing it? Okay. And just to give you, this can get quite complex. So for example, here I've got an open accident, open claim. I can go and look at it, and I can see I've got several challenges here. I've got a triage safety first bundle, and I've got a fraud escalation. So I've got multiple signals that are coming at me that we need to look at to make this decision. Okay. So that's now this is a way, and this, if you look at this data model, it's basically an extract of a graph database that tells me the context bundle that I'm working on. Okay, it gives me a semantic binding. There's my node, there's my edge. And this is an edge view that flattens it, and then these are the semantic elements. Okay, now this is my binding to my claims report. Yeah, that's all the claims, in fact, claims. That's the binding that I get, and that's how I can show you that information. Okay. And then I can jump backwards and forwards, and I can explain any area that's any claim. Why was it settled? What was the reason for denial? And things like that. Dan's comment, early days with this approach, positive and negative test cases, yes. And so this is really important in terms of what you're suggesting, is that we can use as part of the claim triage. I just want to show you this. So here's, I'm hoping you can see this. Probably not sure how to. I'm not sure how to get. But here is reduce false negatives for injury whilst controlling false positives. And the idea is that we can use a reasonableness check, similar to what we were talking with you, Dan, yesterday, is look at anomalies and then start clustering the anomalies. And that's where I was talking about the ensemble. There's 3 different AI techniques to look at anomaly detection. And I can say, well, if all 3 give me a pointer that this was wrong and this was right, then I can build a score and a risk on that, and then I can go and ask for an assessment, and I can ask an SME to clarify whether this was the correct decision. And the false positives are the hardest ones because no one really complains. I just get approved. And we've got to go back several years and then say, well, okay, where did we approve and we shouldn't have approved? What areas don't meet that criteria? Dan, is that the question that you're asking?
Yeah, I think you're building it into the model here. What I was asking is more specifically, and it's a ladder step. I know you've done this, just for this class, and I really appreciate the hard work you've done here. So I wouldn't expect you to have done this. But one thing we're looking at in our project, our AI projects, is defining UAT test cases to test it.
Yes.
After the fact, like actual. So
right.
There's the before time and after time. There's like when you build the model, you identify the data that answers the questions that you're asking. So it's like I don't think there's a methodology where you test while you code.
Yeah, there is one, and I did this in a quality talk, improving quality with AI. And what you can do is when you create a data set for a data model, you can inject anomalies. And if the model doesn't detect those anomalies, then you've got a challenge with the model. And so you can have a pre-injection, you can inject anomalies, and if it doesn't pick it up, you know that you've got some challenges. And then when you're running, you can also continually run this and look at the error rates and then get people to validate those anomalies.
So it does the tool, I mean, so the nice thing, or why I know Mark's right, all of this is a big lift to get it up and working. But you've kind of streamlined it because you're using the Microsoft platform. If you were using an open source accumulation of all of these different components.
it's interesting because I
It's not
actually
as
used
fast,
Python.
is it?
I used Python to generate the synthetic data, and I used Python to inject anomalies.
Right, but the actual model build was through the infrastructure and the framework
Yes,
of Power
yes,
BI, correct?
correct. The semantic model build, yes.
The
But I
semantic
do,
model, yeah.
I do understand. I do believe there are some other open source semantic builders that you can use. So it would be interesting to look at those.
Thank you.
Shane?
Yeah, one of the things I'm encouraging the teams I'm coaching who are doing this kind of work at the moment is to decouple the creation and storage of that context, that semantic meaning, and the rules that you're creating from the execution path. So this idea that we capture it and store it in one place, and then we hydrate the execution of it anywhere that we need it, because what I'm seeing is a massive change in technology stacks at a speed that we haven't had before. So the idea being, effectively the way you're capturing it now, you could in theory hydrate that with Power BI, or you could hydrate it with Omni or with ThoughtSpot or with the one-shot BI app. Yeah, and so I think from what I'm seeing in terms of the change in technology spaces that people are doing with their data stacks, and specifically the amount of times people are now building their own capability rather than buying off the shelf, because with AI tools it is so fast to build. Holding that context outside of the technology and not tightly coupling it is actually the thing that's going to save those teams over the next couple of years.
Yeah, the point you raise is quite interesting, because one of the people that were commenting on the growth of semantic models within, and the open source semantic models, they said that it's been a large failure because DBT tried it, they didn't really succeed. There was no common standard across different vendors for a semantic model. So Power BI rushed away and built its own semantic model. Tableau and Cognos have built their own semantic models, and there's no interchange of those ontologies between the two different vendors. So there isn't a common standard. And the reason I bring that up is they're basically saying you can actually build this thing quicker, and you want to get away from a specific vendor because they may lock you into a certain direction, and then you're in trouble.
Yeah. What's interesting is Snowflake came out to try and define a standard, but then they based the first version of that standard on a tool they bought. So the open standard is now bound to the technology that they owned. They have brought on a whole lot of other logos, right? They brought a whole lot of other companies in that supposedly are part of the standard, but none of the frameworks about an open standard seem to exist. So you can't submit to it. You can't see where it's up to. It's just all marketing releases. So hopefully that standard will actually become, a standard, using the air quotes, and everybody will use the standard. They'll give us interoperability. But we saw that with CWM 20 years ago, right? The Common Warehouse model, where in theory it was meant to be a standard, but that meant that you had no friction moving from vendor to vendor. So everybody, excuse my French, bastardized the standard. So it was like a standard plus, right?
Yeah. And the other problem that it comes from this lack of interchange is, for example, when you build a domain context graph and bundle for a context thing, and then you want to exchange that with another domain. So let's say we are operating in a data mesh or a federated thing, and the technologies are not the same. Now you can't exchange and create a common, here's my context graph for this domain, and then build an enterprise context, which is what we need to do. Is we need to make sure that all of these chatbot AI, Gen AI calls, everything's coming through that enterprise layer. And it doesn't have to go directly to any data source, Power BI. It shouldn't be going that way. It should be coming through.
Yeah, I've got to run, but an interesting session that we could have another time is this idea that as soon as we go to enterprise, we start flooding the context windows.
Yeah.
So what works when we have a very small domain model and a very small set of rules works really, really nicely. But once we start to scale this, and this is what we're finding at the moment, the amount of context around transformations and business logic and definitions and aliases and all that, actually now we actually have to have vectorization to reduce it, or multiple agents in the handoffs. And so actually at an enterprise scale, we still have a lot of AI technology problems that we're hitting when we do it. But I think that would be an interesting session in a couple of weeks as well, around scaling it and what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think what was one of the big criticisms of it battling in your data mesh and data fabric was that whilst they got away really quickly and created some policies, the glossary still wasn't being looked after. And so they still went and used the terms differently with different meanings. And then you get into a lot of challenges when you start to interchange this information.
Yeah, so brave new world though, right? It is exciting. I got to go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good session as always.
Thanks. Cheers. Okay, so what I've done is I've created this data model where I've got a node, and the node type can be actor, signal, policy, and then it creates a relationship with the bundles, and the bundles can be Ford or FNOL or whatever it is, and I can load this up. So I've created two bundles. First of all, it's the FNOL triage. That means the first notice of loss, and how do I triage this into a ranking? You know, how you do those accident triages where you're going to low, medium, high. And what we want to be able to do is when we get a submission by a claimant of a claim, we want to quickly go low, medium, high. And then your policy will say, you know what, if it's a low and it's below this limit, then auto approve. Okay. And of course, what we then have to go back is to be able to review that. But when you're reviewing it, you want all of this information accessible. What made you take that decision? What was the decision or the review that we did in that graph? Okay, and this is what I'm doing here, is trying to show you the data that needs to be collected. I can't find it. No. Okay, there it is there. Okay, so when I come in here, what we're desperately trying to do, what I'm trying to get sorted out is in any place, in any of the areas, I can then go and ask the why. Why did you make this decision? Okay. Was it based on safety first? Was it based on fraud escalation? What happened? Why did we get that result that we were looking at? Yeah, so that was denied, settled, the different areas that we talk about. Alrighty. So just going through that. Okay, so any questions, any comments, any questions? Yeah, I think it's an important point that Shane made. I do believe it's for us to learn how to build these layers from an architectural point of view, and you find the appropriate tool or the appropriate way of creating this yourself. But it's about getting the right layers into place so that we can reduce this challenge between the LLM and the data that we're trying to expose. Kim, yes.
Hi, thank you. I think my question is just around how long did it take, to prepare the data, for AI, for the semantic model. I think because...
Okay. So it's the last 3 days. I spent the last 3 days doing.
Okay. It's just it's managing expectations, from an organization's point of view to have it ready.
Yes. And Kim, I think where it's important is the situation of Then choosing where you're going to start, I would not suggest that you go to the big enterprise semantic layer unless you've got something available, and also your business definitions, and just start to almost look at, if you have an initiative that you want to create a chatbot, and the chatbot's going to answer claims or collect claim information like F and OL, or the chatbot's going to help a claim assessor assess the claim. So choose which one you want to do, and then say, okay, which dashboard or which Power BI or which data, which dimensional model will help me answer that, and then build the semantic model on top of that, and then build the actual the layers and the context, and then you start working there. So I wouldn't go for I think it's just too big to go to everything.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Dan, anything from your side? All right. Mr. Bolton.
Oh, sorry, I stepped away.
No problem. Any questions, Dan? Any comments?
No. So I think the reason I joined the call was to learn what are the fundamental pieces that you need to connect your text prompt, LLM like prompt, to your relational database.
Yeah.
And so the early slides, I think what helped you do this faster was having this Microsoft-based sort of wizard framework. And if you were to do it purely in open source, I think you would have to know what the pieces are, and then you'd have to know how to connect them. And so by learning inside of a proprietary tool, you could probably now go and do this well, maybe not right away, but after doing it in a few proprietary tools, you could go and do it in a non-proprietary manner.
Right.
But it's nice to kind of learn it with a little bit of guidance. That's just my big takeaway.
And I think I don't know if you've been hearing, but lots of people are suggesting, and I think John O'Gorman made the comment, was that they are certainly using and working on the knowledge graph as the primary interface from your LLMs and your Gen AI. It should be going to your knowledge graph first, because that's got that curated environment, and it's got all the terminology and the things that are coming from there. So I do believe that's a lot safer than trying to work with raw SQL databases or any other database. I think that's a nightmare. Any comments, Mark?
I was gonna ask, and I realized I could write to Debbie as well, if it'd be possible for you to post a link to that YouTube with the Power BI. The reality is, I mean, I am a Claude fan, as you know, Howard. I've been using them for a year, but I've not. I can't install an MCP inside my client environment. Right, I'm not off it. Right, so
what I
have to play with it.
Right. What I can show you is how you can do it on your own machine. If you've got a machine, Mark, you can actually you download Claude Local, and you download Visual Studio Code, which is free. Both of them are free.
Yeah.
Within that, you can download the MCP and Power BI MCP. So these actually tell you how to do it and how to build it. So cool. There's the link there. So you can build everything locally. You don't need servers. You don't need anything.
Cool. Okay. I just got to talk to my boss about more hack time.
Yeah.
You know.
Sure. Mr. Bolton, any comments from your side?
Really, just off the back of that chat we had about RAG and CAG the other day. It was cool to see the CAG coming to life.
Yes, that's right. And
that's weird. I was actually trying to explain it to somebody early in the week how cool it was, and I showed the example in context of that business.
Yes.
But I was failing to explain, because the business owner looked at my example and said, but that's RAG, and I was failing to see the step up to the CAG.
That's right. So the context graph, graph that I'm showing you, that's what's called a CAG, which is the knowledge assisted graph, and that's the makeup of the context graph and the context mesh. That's what the CAG is doing. Yeah. So that's a new acronym that's come out in the last 2 months or so.
I think I need to just study that a bit deeper to understand, to explain that difference between, because when the client looked at the example I gave you, I showed you that example about events and understanding who was there at the time and all that, and they were failing to see the difference between what RAG is doing versus CAG, and I was failing to explain.
Okay. So I think that I think the important thing is a situation of around a event on your fact table. You can explain how you made that decision. Okay, so the fact table. Let's say you're in the medical thing, and they make a decision about the use of an operating room. That's a resource. Okay.
Yeah.
And now the question is going to come as well. Why did you choose that operation in that room? Okay. And then you associate who was there, what the actors were, what was the evidence of the decision that you made, what were the signals that you were getting, and then what is the SME's reason for overriding whatever it was. Okay. So that's what the CAG is now. You are connecting the signals, the input to your decision making, and then you're associating it with an event in the fact table.
Okay.
So it's the why.
So
remember the facts are giving you the what, but it doesn't describe the business context that gave you the why. That how did I make this decision, and that's what the CAG is.
So essentially, so is that RAG level telling you what happened?
Well, I mean, the thing is that the RAG can go and look at any document, but it has to tie it back to that specific fact row, right?
Okay. Right.
William, in terms of legal team, when you escalate the decision, when you make a decision, it's about choosing the right actors that need to respond to the decision-making process. And you can certainly have a person in a legal team getting involved in that situation to say, this policy said we need to do that, and this PII, whatever it is. And so you can certainly include the legal team in the decision-making team, right? And then they have to attach all of the information they have to that row, that CAG row. So the context bundle is, this is the context we're making the decision, and then we attach all of the evidence and the URIs and the PDFs and everything in that, because we also need to be careful on temporal logic. So a decision made 5 years ago had a policy of version 22, and now we're making it on policy version 24. So tell me exactly which policy was used at that point in time. All right. Great. Thanks, everybody. If there any other questions for Jackson, I hope I didn't lose you. Thank you, Mark. I probably did.
Thanks. Like I said, I'm coming back next week for the demo.
Yeah, I'll help you put it together. Cheers, Mark.
Howard?
Yes.
I could probably ask you offline, but I'm also keen, if you've got I don't know if you documented your, like as a case study. I wouldn't mind trying to sink my teeth into building this, building something like this, for just because watching it is great. Just the nuts and bolts is.
So Paul, I'll be putting it into that training course for the architects. So it's actually going to go in there, and that will be part of that day 4 where we take them through. Remember, because in that course, I'm saying here's the semantic model.
Yes.
That's what we're using it for, but it doesn't bring in knowledge management. Semantic model doesn't bring in knowledge management in terms of what was, that after action report, remember we do that in Agile and after action, what did I learn on that decision? What was the context? Where was in? That's the thing that the semantic, the ontologies are not going to give you.
Cool.
Right.
I'll see you there on that prep.
All right, cool.
Cool,
Thanks,
man.
everybody.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Sure.
Bye.